The blizzard roared, burying the Oregon wilderness in a world of white. Amidst the fury of nature, a broken veteran followed the tracks of a strange dog. The German Shepherd wasn't wandering, it moved with a resolute purpose, leading him to the base of a sheer granite cliff, an absolute dead end. But then, the dog did the impossible. It used its paw, pressing decisively on a rock that looked no different from the rest. A soft click echoed, and then a low humming sound began to emanate from deep within the mountain. A hairline seam of light appeared on the rock face before a massive steel door began to slide open, revealing a high-tech bunker. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The wind was a living thing, a predator that clawed at the corners of the small cabin with a desperate, hungry sound. Each gust rattled the single pane of glass in the window, the vibration a low hum that seeped into Jake's bones. Outside, the world had vanished, consumed by a churning vortex of white. The first great blizzard of the Oregon winter had descended upon the Cascades with the fury of a judgment, burying the forest, the mountains, and the memory of the sun beneath a thick, suffocating blanket. Inside, the cold was just as relentless. It was a damp, creeping chill that the weak flames in the stone fireplace could not defeat. It clung to the rough-hewn wooden walls and pooled in the shadows, a constant reminder of the encroaching decay, both outside and within. This cabin was not a home. It was a foxhole, a place to hide from a world that no longer made sense, a world he no longer had a place in. For 7 years since his discharge, this had been his entire world. 7 years of watching the seasons turn through that one grimy window. 7 years of silence, broken only by the roar of the wind and the ghosts of memory. Jacob Thorne, known to everyone as Jake, sat at a small, scarred table in the center of the room. At 40, the man he was supposed to be had been weathered away, leaving behind this gaunt, hard-edged stranger. His frame was tall and lean, the powerful musculature of his former life as an Army Ranger, now thinned by neglect. But the strength was still there, coiled and dormant beneath the surface. His brown hair, cut short out of habit, was flecked with gray at the temples, a stark contrast to the dark, unruly beard that shadowed a jaw set in a permanent line of tension. His face was a roadmap of hardship, but his eyes, a deep and weary blue, held the ghost of a kindness that had long since retreated. He wore a faded red and black flannel shirt over a gray thermal, the fabric thin and frayed at the cuffs. His gaze was fixed on a single piece of paper on the table, its crisp white an insult to the gloom of the room. It was an official letter, cold and impersonal, a foreclosure notice. He had read the words a dozen times, but they still felt foreign, a language from a life he was no longer a part of. Notice of default, failure to remit, immediate eviction. The phrases were clinical, sterile blades that cut through the last thread of his connection to the civilized world. This flimsy cabin, this last bastion against the wilderness and his own mind, was no longer his. It was the final, pathetic failure in a long, unbroken chain of them. He had failed to readjust. He had failed to hold a job. He had failed to keep the nightmares at bay. And now he had failed to even keep a roof over his head. A bitter, soundless laugh caught in his throat. He thought of Leo. He always thought of Leo in moments like these when the silence grew too loud. He could almost hear his voice, the easy laughter that could cut through the thickest tension. "Come on, Jake," Leo would say, a grin spreading across his face. "You worry too much. We always find a way." But Leo wasn't here. Leo had found his way to a dusty grave in the mountains of Afghanistan in 2018, on a mission that had gone so wrong, so fast. And Jake, the shield, the protector, had failed to stop it. He had brought his body home, but he had left his soul behind in that sun-scorched valley, right alongside his brother in arms. This foreclosure notice wasn't just about a house. It was the final verdict on his life since Leo's death. guilty of failure, sentenced to oblivion. Miles away in the small, orderly town of Pine Ridge, nestled at the foot of the mountains, the blizzard was just as fierce, but the world felt different. Here, there were warm lights in the windows and the promise of community. In a small, meticulously kept house on the edge of town, an old man stood watching the storm. Samuel Croft was in his late 70s, a wiry, tough man with a face as weathered as old leather, and eyes that held the quiet, watchful patience of a man who had seen more than his share of the world's troubles. A veteran of a different, muddier war, he recognized the finality in a storm like this. He looked from the window to a calendar on the wall. The date was circled in red. He then pulled a worn, leather-bound journal from a drawer, flipping to the last entry, written in a familiar, confident script. The instructions were clear, memorized years ago, but checked out of habit. If you hear the bank is taking the property, or if a storm comes that could cut him off for good, it's time. Don't wait. Samuel sighed, a plume of breath fogging in the cool air of the room. He walked to the back door and opened it. Lying on a thick rug, a magnificent dog lifted its head. It was a German shepherd, 10 years old, with a thick coat of silver gray and white that spoke of a noble lineage. His body was that of a seasoned athlete, powerful and scarred, his movements deliberate and sure. But it was his eyes that held you. They were a startlingly intelligent shade of amber, and they regarded Samuel not with the simple affection of a pet, but with the calm, knowing gaze of a partner. This was Kaiser. "Well, old friend," Samuel said softly, his voice raspy with age. "The time has come. You know where to go. You know who to find." Kaiser rose to his feet, a quiet whine rumbling in his chest, a sound of understanding, not protest. He nudged his head against the old man's hand. Samuel gave his ear a final, firm scratch. "Go on now. Leo is counting on you." With a final look, Kaiser turned and stepped out into the raging blizzard. He did not hesitate. He did not look back. He lowered his head against the wind, his paws finding purchase in the rapidly deepening snow, and began his journey, a gray and white phantom moving with resolute purpose into the heart of the storm. An hour later, Jake was still at the table, the letter now a crumpled ball in his fist. The fire had died to embers, and the cabin was almost completely dark. The wind howled, and in its roar he could hear the echoes of gunfire, of shouted commands, of Leo's final sharp cry. He closed his eyes. It would be so easy to just walk out that door into the white, to lie down and let the cold take him. An end to the failure, an end to the memory. Then he heard it. A faint scratching sound at the door. He dismissed it as a branch, or the wind playing tricks. But it came again, more insistent this time, followed by a low, pained whine that was nearly swallowed by the gale. Every instinct, long buried under layers of grief and apathy, screamed at him. Something was alive out there, something in trouble. With a groan, he pushed himself to his feet, his joints aching from the cold. He unlatched the heavy door, pulling it inward against the force of the wind. A blast of snow and icy air filled the room. And there, half collapsed on his doorstep, was the German shepherd. It was covered in ice and snow, shivering violently, one of its paws held limply off the ground. But even in its exhaustion, its amber eyes found his, and they held a stunning, unwavering focus. Jake's training took over. He reached down without a second thought, his hands finding purchase in the dog's thick coat, and hauled the heavy animal inside, slamming the door shut against the storm. The dog, Kaiser, collapsed onto the floor, breathing in ragged gasps. Jake knelt beside him, his hands expertly checking for injuries. That's when he saw it. The collar. It wasn't a store-bought leather or nylon collar. It was made of olive-drab paracord, woven into a thick, intricate king cobra knot. His breath hitched. It was their unit's signature. Something they all did during downtime on deployment, a small piece of shared identity. He hadn't seen one in 7 years. His fingers traced the familiar pattern, and then he looked, truly looked, at the dog. This wasn't just some stray that had lost its way. The exhaustion was there, but beneath it was a deep well of strength and an unnerving intelligence. The dog met his gaze, and in that moment, the world stood still. The wind, the cold, the foreclosure notice, it all faded away. This was not a coincidence. This was not a random act of nature. This was a message from the past. This was Leo's ghost, manifest in fur and loyalty, sitting on his floor. And for the first time in a long, long time, Jacob Thorne felt something other than despair. He felt purpose. The silence in the cabin was a strange new thing. For 7 years, silence had been a hollow, aching void. Now it was a heavy, charged presence, thick with unspoken questions and the weight of a ghost. The storm still raged outside, a muffled symphony of shrieking wind and rattling ice. But inside, the world had shrunk to the space between a broken man and a dog sent from the past. Jake knelt on the floor, his fingers still resting on the rough, familiar weave of the paracord collar. Kaiser, the German shepherd, lay on the floor, his breathing evening out as the warmth of the cabin began to chase the deep chill from his bones. He had lapped up a bowl of water Jake had offered, a purely practical act, and then settled, his amber eyes never leaving Jake's face. They were not pleading or fearful. They were watchful, patient, and filled with an intelligence that was profoundly unsettling. This was impossible. Dogs didn't carry messages. The dead didn't send emissaries. Every rational part of Jake's mind, the part that had survived the chaos of war and the slow decay of grief, screamed that this was a coincidence. A stray dog, a familiar knot from a past life, a desperate mind connecting dots that weren't there. It was easier to believe in madness than in miracles. But his instincts, the ones honed in the mountains of Afghanistan, told a different story. They recognized the calm demeanor of an animal trained for extreme stress. They saw the purpose in those steady eyes, and they felt the impossible weight of Leo's last will pressing down on him. Leo, the planner, the strategist who always had 3 backup plans for every situation. Was this his last, most impossible contingency? The battle raged within Jake for long minutes. To stay was to accept the end. To let the foreclosure notice be the final word in his story. To let the snow pile up until the door would no longer open. To let the embers in the fireplace die, just as they had in his soul. It was the easy path, the one he had been walking for 7 years. To go, to follow this dog. That was to step back into a world of missions and objectives, a world of pain and purpose he had fought so hard to forget. It was an act of faith, and faith was a currency he had run out of long ago. As if sensing the turning point, Kaiser stirred. With a low groan, he pushed himself up, first onto his front paws, then rising to his full, powerful height. He shook his thick coat, sending a spray of melted snow across the floorboards. He was still tired, his movements stiff from the cold, but the exhaustion was secondary to the mission. He walked steadily to the door, the very one he had collapsed at just minutes before. He didn't scratch or whine. He simply stood before it, looked over his shoulder at Jake, and waited. The summons was clear, unspoken, absolute. In that moment, the soldier in Jake woke up. He didn't make a conscious decision. His body moved on its own, a well-oiled machine that had been left to rust but had not yet seized. He stood, his joints protesting, and moved to the corner where his old gear lay. He pulled on a heavy, insulated parka, the fabric worn and stained but still functional. He stomped his feet into thick, waterproof boots. He found his pack, checking its contents with an efficiency born of muscle memory. A knife, a fire starter, a small first aid kit, a canteen of water. It was the ghost of a life he once lived, and it settled on his shoulders like a familiar weight. He grabbed the crumpled foreclosure notice from the table and tossed it into the dying embers of the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. A final verdict overturned. Jake opened the door, and the storm greeted them with a physical blow. Kaiser stepped out into the white maelstrom without hesitation. Jake pulled his hood tight, leaned into the wind, and followed. The world outside the cabin was pure chaos. The snow was a blinding horizontal assault, and the wind bit at any exposed skin with teeth of ice. Visibility was less than 10 feet. For any normal person or any normal animal, travel would be impossible, a suicidal act. But Kaiser was not a normal animal. He did not bound through the snow. He moved with a calculated, energy-conserving gait. He led Jake away from the faint outline of the path to the cabin and plunged into the thick woods, using the massive trunks of ancient firs and cedars as a windbreak. Jake, an expert tracker and survivalist, immediately recognized the intelligence behind their route. The dog was not taking the path of least resistance. He was taking the path of least observation. He kept to the low ground, following the contours of the land, in a way that would shield them from view from any higher elevation. He skirted open meadows, choosing to push through dense, difficult thickets rather than expose them for even a moment. He led Jake across a frozen creek at its narrowest, most sheltered point. Every turn, every choice, screamed of tactical planning. This was a military infiltration route, not a deer trail. As they walked, the hours blurring together in the featureless white, something inside Jake began to shift. The thick, suffocating fog of his depression, the constant dull ache of his grief, began to recede. It was replaced by a cold, sharp focus. His senses, long dormant, came alive. He noted the direction of the wind, the depth of the snow, the stability of the ground beneath his feet. His body, which had felt like a leaden weight for years, now responded with a grim, familiar efficiency. He was no longer a man waiting to die. He was an operator on a mission. He did not know the objective, but he trusted his guide. He watched Kaiser, amazed. The dog moved with an unwavering certainty, occasionally stopping to look back, ensuring Jake was still with him, his amber eyes burning bright against the snow. He was a compass, a guide, a silent commander, leading a two-man team through enemy territory. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kaiser slowed. They had arrived at the base of a massive granite cliff, a sheer wall of stone that rose up into the swirling snow, disappearing from sight. It was a dead end, a place where the forest simply stopped. A small alcove at its base offered some respite from the relentless wind, and Kaiser led Jake into it. Jake leaned against the cold stone, his breath clouding in the air, his muscles screaming in protest. "Okay, Leo," he whispered to the wind. "What now?" Kaiser did not rest. He walked along the base of the cliff, sniffing intently. He stopped at a section that looked identical to the rest, a flat, unremarkable face of rock. He sniffed at a particular spot near the ground, then looked back at Jake. He whined once, a sharp, purposeful sound. Then he lifted his right paw and pressed it firmly against a specific rock. The rock was no different from the others, but under the pressure of Kaiser's paw, it depressed slightly with a soft click. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum vibrated through the soles of Jake's boots, a deep mechanical thrum that felt alien in the heart of the wilderness. A thin, perfect seam of light appeared in the rock face, tracing the outline of a large rectangle. With a near-silent hiss of hydraulics, the massive section of granite began to retract inward, revealing not a cave, but a thick, reinforced steel door worthy of a bank vault. The door swung open, spilling a clean, warm yellow light out into the raging blizzard. It revealed a modern, sterile corridor, a stark contrast to the wild, chaotic nature outside. Jake stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The storm raged behind him, a world of chaos and death. Before him was a doorway into an impossible secret. And standing at the threshold, looking back as if to say, "Are you coming?" was the dog. Leo's dog? The heavy steel door slid shut behind them with a soft, definitive hiss, the sound of a vault being sealed. The roar of the blizzard was instantly severed, replaced by a profound humming silence. The air inside was cool, dry, and smelled faintly of ozone and filtered air, a scent so clean it felt alien after the raw, wild air of the mountains. Jake stood blinking in the warm, steady light of the corridor, his mind struggling to bridge the gap between the raging, primitive world he had just left and the sterile, futuristic environment he had entered. Kaiser, the German shepherd, shook the last of the snow from his coat and looked up at Jake, then gave a soft woof and trotted confidently down the corridor. His paws made no sound on the smooth metallic floor. After a moment of stunned hesitation, Jake followed. The corridor opened into a large circular chamber that served as the heart of the facility. It was a space built for function, not comfort. A simple military-style bunk was built into one wall, its gray blanket folded with perfect precision. A small, efficient kitchenette with stainless steel surfaces occupied another corner. But the dominant feature of the room was the workstation. It was an impressive setup, a semicircle of monitors, keyboards, and what looked like military-grade communications equipment, all centered around a large primary screen. A single server rack hummed quietly nearby, its blinking green and amber lights the only sign of the immense power held within. This was Leo's world, the world of data, strategy, and secrets. Kaiser led Jake directly to the ergonomic chair in front of the console, and then lay down at its base, his duty as a guide seemingly complete. He rested his head on his paws, his amber eyes fixed on Jake, waiting. Taking a deep breath, Jake sank into the chair. It felt strange, sitting at a desk after 7 years of avoiding anything that resembled a structured life. He touched a key and the main monitor flickered to life. It displayed not a welcoming desktop, but a cascade of error messages. Directory not found. Master file table corrupted. Critical system failure. A wave of despair washed over Jake. He had followed this ghost of a dog through a blizzard, only to be met by a dead end, a broken computer. But then he saw a single, blinking cursor in the top left corner of the screen. A command prompt. It was a back door, a way in for someone who knew what they were doing. Some of his ranger training had included signals intelligence and basic field data recovery. It had been years, but the knowledge was still there, buried deep. With a grim determination, Jake's fingers found the keyboard. The work was slow, painstaking. He wasn't just recovering files, he was performing digital archaeology. He bypassed the corrupted operating system, accessing the raw data on the drives. He found fragments, pieces of a puzzle, scattered and broken by what must have been a fail-safe program designed to wipe the system. Leo, it seemed, had planned for every possibility except complete success. The first file he managed to restore was a short, grainy video clip with no sound. It showed a group of men in sterile, unmarked uniforms meeting with what Jake instantly recognized as high-level insurgents. They were exchanging a briefcase. The location was unmistakably the same region in Afghanistan where his unit had been operating. Next, he pieced together a heavily distorted audio log. Leo's voice, filtered through layers of static, was tense. Discrepancies in the intel are too consistent. Apex Solutions is feeding us bad data, I'm sure of it. The timing of their private convoys, it matches the spikes in enemy activity. It's not a coincidence. I have to dig deeper. Apex Solutions, a private military contractor. They had handled logistics and intelligence support for Jake's unit. They were supposed to be on their side. Jake's blood ran cold. He kept working, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his mind racing. He decrypted a text file. It was a ledger, a list of offshore bank transfers between shell corporations, all linked back to Apex Solutions. The amounts were staggering. He was no longer just recovering data. He was uncovering a betrayal of unimaginable scale. Leo, working as an analyst between combat deployments, had stumbled upon the ultimate treason. A trusted American contractor was actively collaborating with the enemy, selling intelligence to prolong the war, all for profit. They were getting soldiers killed to increase their bottom line. Finally, after hours of work, he found it. One last file, larger than the others, buried in a protected sector of the drive. It was a video file, labeled simply, for Jake. He ran the recovery sequence, his heart pounding against his ribs. The screen flickered, and then an image resolved. It was Leo. He was sitting in this very chair, looking haggard and exhausted, but his eyes burned with a fierce, resolute light. It was the look he got right before a mission, the look that said he had accepted the risks and was ready for what came next. "Jake," he began, his voice clear but strained. "If you're seeing this, then I was right. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I had to drag you into this." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's Apex. They're dirty. They've been playing both sides for years, getting rich off our blood. I found the proof, Jake, the transactions, the communications. It's all here, somewhere on these drives. I've hidden it as best I can." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They know I'm close. This next deployment, the one we're shipping out for tomorrow, it's a setup. I know it is. They're going to hit us, and they're going to make it look like the enemy. They're going to try to silence me for good." Tears welled in Jake's eyes, hot and sharp. He had thought it was bad luck, a mission gone wrong, but it was a planned execution, an ambush. "I have to go," Leo continued, his voice hardening. "If I back out now, they'll know for sure, and they'll come after both of us. This is the only way. At least this way, I can make sure I'm there to cover you when it goes sideways." He glanced down, and for a moment, the camera panned to Kaiser, who was just a young dog then, lying faithfully at his feet. "Take care of Kaiser for me, will you?" Leo's voice cracked for the first time. "He's smarter than most people I know. He'll get you here. The entrance mechanism is keyed to a pressure plate only he knows. He's my last resort, my ghost in the machine." He looked back at the camera, directly at Jake, a sad smile playing on his lips. "You were always the better soldier, Jake. The shield. I was just the guy who pointed you in the right direction. So I'm pointing you now, one last time. Finish this. For me. For all the guys we lost because of them. I know you can. I always have." The screen went dark. Jake sat in the humming silence of the bunker, the last words of his best friend echoing in the sterile air. The grief that had hollowed him out for 7 years was still there, but now it was joined by something else. A cold, pure, clarifying rage. His guilt had been a poison, telling him he had failed to protect his friend. But the truth was so much worse. Leo hadn't been a casualty of war. He had been a sacrifice. Murdered. He looked down at Kaiser. The old dog had lifted his head and was watching him, his amber eyes filled with a sad, ancient wisdom. The mission was no longer a mystery. The legacy was no longer a question. It was a burden, a duty, an honor. It was a promise to a dead man. And Jacob Thorne was a man who kept his promises. The darkness that followed Leo's final message was heavier than the silence that had preceded it. It was a darkness filled with truth and betrayal, a void where 7 years of misplaced guilt had been violently carved out, leaving behind the raw, burning wound of a murder avenged. Jake sat motionless, the glow of the monitors painting his face in stark relief, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the desk. Kaiser, the German shepherd, whined softly from the floor, sensing the storm that was now raging inside the man. He nudged his head against Jake's leg, a silent, grounding presence. The touch broke the spell. Jake took a shuddering breath, the air a painful rasp in his lungs. The soldier, the operator who had been dormant for so long, took command. Grief was a luxury. Rage was a fuel. But purpose required a plan, and a plan required intelligence. He needed to understand this place, this legacy, this fortress. With a newfound resolve, he stood. His first priority was a full tactical sweep. He had to know the layout, the capabilities, and the vulnerabilities of his new command center. Kaiser padded silently at his heels, a gray shadow following him as he began a methodical exploration. The main chamber was the heart, but several corridors branched off from it. He found a small, functional bathroom with a water recycling shower. He found a storage pantry stocked with enough non-perishable food and medical supplies to last for years. Everything was vacuum-sealed, organized, and labeled with Leo's precise, military-style handwriting. Every detail spoke of meticulous, long-term planning. In the main operations room, he returned to the computer. Buried in a non-corrupted sector of the server was a folder labeled Facility. It was locked, but the password hint was a single question. Where we first met. Jake smiled grimly. Fort Benning. He typed in the name of the training base, and the folder opened. It contained a trove of documents. The first ones he opened were scanned copies of old, yellowed blueprints. The letterhead was official, bearing the seal of the United States Army Corps of Engineers, dated 1961. The title read, Continuity of Government Communications Relay Station, Cascade Sector. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a prepper's bunker. This was a decommissioned Cold War relic, a hardened node in a network designed to ensure the government could still function after a nuclear war. It was built to be invisible, impregnable, and completely self-sufficient. Deeper in the folder, he found more recent documents. A bill of sale from the General Services Administration dated 10 years ago, transferring the deed for the abandoned Geological Survey outpost to a shell corporation Jake had never heard of. And behind the corporation, a single purchasing agent, Leo Vance. A fresh wave of awe washed over Jake. Leo hadn't just built a hideout. He had acquired a piece of forgotten military infrastructure, a ghost of the past, and painstakingly resurrected it. He had spent years turning this forgotten tomb into a shield. Following the original schematics, Jake found a door marked Utility. Inside, the low hum he'd felt throughout the bunker became more pronounced. The room was dominated by a compact, silent machine that was the source of all power. A digital display on its side read, Geothermal Generator. Status, Nominal. Uptime, 10 years, 4 months. Below it, another screen detailed the power consumption. For the last 7 years, the facility had been in a state of near-total hibernation, drawing only minuscule power to maintain the climate control and keep the core computer systems on standby. The moment Kaiser had activated the door, the system had roared to life, bringing every circuit and light in the facility to full operational status. He saw the deep well water pump, the military-grade air filtration system with its chemical and biological filters, the hardened servers. This fortress could survive anything. It had been built to withstand the end of the world, and Leo had repurposed it for his own private war. But as he cross-referenced the new digital layouts Leo had created with the original Cold War blueprints, Jake noticed a discrepancy. In the main chamber behind the wall where the kitchenette was, the original plans showed a solid bedrock foundation. Leo's plans showed a hollow space, a hidden room. He returned to the main room, Kaiser watching him with intelligent eyes. He ran his hands along the smooth metallic wall panels behind the small counter. They were seamless, cold to the touch. But in the corner, almost perfectly hidden in the shadows, he found a tiny, almost invisible indentation. He pressed it. There was a soft click and a section of the wall slid away with the same silent hydraulic hiss as the main entrance, revealing a dark, narrow chamber beyond. As the lights flickered on automatically, Jake's breath caught in his throat. This was the armory. It was not a collection of guns. It was a statement of intent. Mounted on the far wall, held in a place of honor, was a BCM Recce 16 rifle. It was a soldier's weapon, perfectly configured. A Trijicon ASIOG optic sat on the top rail, providing lethal accuracy at any range. A sleek black suppressor was attached to the barrel, a tool for a ghost. A tactical light and laser module was mounted on the side. It was an extension of a warrior's will, and it felt as familiar in Jake's hands as his own heartbeat. Below it, laid out in custom-cut foam inserts, were a SIG Sauer P226 pistol, a dozen fully loaded magazines for both weapons, and a combat knife. On shelves to the side were 2 sets of body armor, a fully stocked trauma kit, advanced night vision goggles, and encrypted radios. This was not just an arsenal. It was a message. Leo had not simply left him weapons. He had left him his weapons, the tools of their shared trade, prepared with a professional's care and a brother's understanding. He had anticipated this moment, this passing of the torch. He knew that if the truth were ever to see the light of day, it would have to be protected by force of arms. Jake picked up the rifle. The weight was perfect, the balance an old, forgotten friend. He checked the action, the movement smooth and clean. The cold steel felt more real than anything he had touched in 7 years. The broken man who had followed a dog into a blizzard was gone. The veteran who had received a foreclosure notice had been burned to ash in the fireplace. In his place stood a soldier, armed with a righteous fury and a mission handed down from the grave. He racked the charging handle, the sound a sharp metallic crack that echoed in the silent fortress. It was the sound of a promise being made. He looked down at Kaiser, who had risen to his feet and was standing beside him, a silent sentinel. The fortress was secure. The legacy was understood. The war had just begun. Several days passed in the quiet hum of the fortress. Outside, the blizzard had exhausted its fury, giving way to a world of pristine, silent white under a cold, clear sun. Inside, a transformation was taking place. The gaunt, haunted recluse was being systematically erased, replaced by the soldier he had once been. Jake had used the Spartan bathroom to shave off the thick, unruly beard, revealing the hard, determined jawline beneath. He had trimmed his hair. His movements were no longer sluggish with despair, but crisp and efficient. The cabin had been a tomb. This bunker was a crucible, burning away the weakness of the past 7 years and reforging the man within. He had spent every waking moment at the computer terminal, absorbing the mountains of data Leo had collected. He learned the corporate structures, the names, the timelines. He had a clear picture of the conspiracy, but it was a picture drawn from circumstantial evidence. Financial records, redacted mission logs, and Leo's own speculative audio notes. He had the smoke, but he didn't have the gun. The gun, he knew, was locked away in a single, massive encrypted file container on the primary server. It was named, with Leo's typical flair for the dramatic, Valhalla. For 2 days, Jake had thrown every decryption tool he knew at it, but the file remained sealed, an impenetrable digital vault. It was protected by a level of military-grade encryption he had never encountered before. Frustrated, he began to search for a key, a clue, anything Leo might have left. He scoured the server, digging into hidden partitions and system files. He eventually found a single, password-protected text file named Breadcrumbs. The password prompt was a question only he could answer. The ridge at Korangal? A ghost of a memory surfaced. A firefight in 2012. Pinned down, out of ammo. Leo laying down suppressive fire with a machine gun, drawing the enemy's attention while Jake scrambled to safety. The name of the ridge they had held against impossible odds. He typed it in, Shepherd's Hill. The file opened. It was a note from Leo. Jake, if you're reading this, you're at the final door. Valhalla is the whole thing, everything you need, all of it unredacted. The smoking gun, the confession, the kill order. But the encryption is a beast. It's a 2-part key. The first part is embedded in this system. The second part, the final key, has to be requested from an old, decommissioned military archival server. It's a ghost server, technically offline, but they keep it running. The key is tied to my old service number. Here's the problem. This is the trap. I'm almost certain Apex has a tripwire on that server, a silent alarm tied to that specific key. They couldn't scrub the military's deep archives, but they could watch them. Making the request is the only way to open the file, but doing so will create a tiny digital footprint, a whisper in the dark. I'm betting they're still listening for that whisper. It's a gamble, brother. The minute you open that file, the clock starts ticking. They will know someone has my legacy, and they will come for you, but it's the only way. Good luck. Leo? Jake leaned back, the words hanging in the silent air. For 7 years, he had lived as a ghost, his primary mission to remain invisible. Now he was being asked to light a beacon, to deliberately announce his presence to the very monsters who had murdered his best friend. Hiding had been his shield. This note was asking him to throw it away and pick up a sword. He walked into the armory, the cool air of the hidden room, a balm on his skin. He looked at the BCM rifle hanging on the wall. He looked at Kaiser, who had followed him and now sat watching, his head cocked as if he understood the weight of the moment. The dog was the living embodiment of Leo's plan, a plan that did not involve hiding forever. It was a plan of action, of confrontation, of justice. The debate was short. There was no real choice. To leave the file locked was to let Leo's sacrifice be for nothing. It was to let Apex win. He had not come this far to retreat back into the shadows. He returned to the terminal. He spent the next hour preparing, building a series of digital walls around himself. He configured the bunker system to route the connection request through a chain of encrypted proxies, bouncing the signal across the globe from servers in Iceland to Singapore to Brazil. It wouldn't make him invisible, but it would make him a ghost, a flicker of data that was hard to pin down. With a deep breath, he initiated the sequence. Command lines scrolled across the screen. For the first time since he had arrived, the bunker was connected to the outside world. The request was sent. A few seconds of agonizing silence passed. Then a new line of code appeared. Key received. He immediately severed the connection. The entire process had taken less than 15 seconds. He applied the new key to the Valhalla file. A progress bar appeared on the screen, and this time it began to fill. Decrypting. Complete. A new directory opened, and its contents flooded the screen. Unredacted mission orders with falsified threat assessments signed by an Apex executive. Audio recordings of phone calls, the voices of men with no conscience discussing casualty numbers as if they were stock prices. Satellite imagery showing Apex hardware being delivered to insurgent strongholds. It was all there. Undeniable. Complete. He had it. He had the gun. Hundreds of miles away, in a sleek glass-walled office at the top of a skyscraper in Reston, Virginia, a man stood looking out at the sprawling city below. Elias Thorne was a man sculpted from ice and ambition. In his late 40s, he wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jake's entire cabin. Not a single gray hair was out of place in his perfectly coiffed, silver-black hair. He was handsome in a severe, predatory way, his face composed of sharp angles and cold, intelligent eyes. A former colonel in Army intelligence, he had long ago traded his uniform for the far more lucrative armor of corporate power. He was the chief of security for Apex Solutions, and he ran it with the same ruthless efficiency with which he had once run covert operations. A quiet chime sounded at his door. A young, nervous-looking analyst entered, holding a tablet. "Sir," the analyst began, his voice tight, "we have a flag from the old Cerberus system." Elias turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask. "Cerberus has been dormant for years." "Yes, sir. That's why it's a red flag. A request was made to the DoD archival server for a very specific decryption key, one tied to the service record of a deceased asset, an analyst named Leo Vance." Elias's expression did not change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. Vance. That was the incident in Kunar Province, 2018. Yes, sir. The signal was heavily masked, routed all over the planet. But we managed to isolate a probable origin point, a remote, sparsely populated sector, the Cascade Mountains, Oregon. Elias Thorne allowed a small, cold smile to touch his lips. He had always known this day might come. He had wondered, for 7 years, what had become of Vance's unrecovered work. He had assumed it was lost forever in the chaos of that ambush. He had been wrong. He turned to a large holographic map of the United States on his wall and zoomed in on the highlighted region in Oregon. A ghost had finally surfaced. "Activate Task Force Omega," Elias said, his voice a low, chilling command. "Full retrieval protocol. I want the asset, and I want the loose end tied." He paused, his cold eyes fixed on the map. Permanently. The moment the evidence was unlocked, the atmosphere in the bunker shifted. The quiet hum of the servers, once a sound of sanctuary, now felt like the ticking of a countdown clock. Jake knew he had started a war. He had kicked the hornet's nest, and the swarm was coming. There was no fear, only a cold, sharp clarity that had been absent from his life for 7 long years. He was no longer a man adrift in the past. He was a soldier with an objective, facing a tangible threat. He spent the first hour committing the entirety of the Valhalla file to a hardened, military-grade data chip. He worked with a speed and precision that felt like a forgotten language returning to his tongue, his hands moving surely over the keyboard, encrypting the chip with his own codes. He was creating a second front, ensuring Leo's legacy could survive even if the fortress fell. As he finished, a calm, synthesized female voice, startlingly clear, echoed through the chamber. "Proximity alert. Unidentified aerial vehicle detected. Sector 7. Altitude 500 meters and descending." Jake's head snapped up. On one of the auxiliary monitors, a topographical map of the surrounding mountains glowed to life. A single red dot, representing the drone, was slowly circling the area of the cliff face. They were scouting. The hunt had begun. A strange sense of calm washed over him. The anxiety that had been his constant companion for years, the gnawing dread of nightmares and memories, evaporated. This was different. This was an enemy he could see, a threat he could fight. For 7 years, he had been haunted by ghosts he couldn't touch. Now, the ghosts were sending men with guns, and that was a language Jake understood perfectly. He moved to the hidden armory, his steps sure and steady. He stripped off his worn flannel shirt and pulled on a dark thermal base layer, followed by the lightweight plate carrier. He cinched the straps tight, the familiar pressure a comforting embrace. He holstered the Sig Sauer pistol, sliding a spare magazine into a pouch on the vest. He picked up the BCM rifle, the cold, hard reality of the weapon, a final confirmation of his new purpose. He was no longer hiding. He was preparing for battle. He returned to the main console, intending to activate the bunker's defensive systems. He scanned the interface, searching for the right commands. He found schematics, power grids, and life support systems, but nothing labeled defense or tactical. Leo, the master of secrets, had buried it deeper. As if sensing his frustration, Kaiser rose from his spot on the floor. The old dog walked with quiet purpose to a seemingly blank section of the wall beside the main server rack. He nudged a specific, almost invisible panel with his nose. With a soft chime, the main monitor in front of Jake flickered, the directory of files replaced by a stunning, 3-dimensional holographic map of the mountainside. The red dot of the drone was clearly visible, but now so were dozens of green icons scattered throughout the terrain. Jake stared in awe. He was looking at the fortress's nervous system. He saw the icons for the perimeter motion sensors, the seismic detectors, and, most importantly, a powerful wide-area signal jammer. He found the command to activate it, and a moment later, The drone's red dot on the map began to flash before turning gray. Signal lost, the screen red. He had blinded their eye in the sky. But Kaiser wasn't finished. The dog walked over to a specific tile on the floor, one that looked identical to all the others. He tapped it twice with his paw. A section of the floor slid away, revealing a recessed compartment. Inside was a small panel with a series of switches and remote activators. A diagram on the inside of the lid showed they were connected to a series of non-lethal traps Leo had engineered into the surrounding landscape. Concussive charges to disorient, hidden nets, and high-intensity strobe emitters. The dog then trotted down the main utility corridor, stopping at what Jake had assumed was a dead end. He nudged a large, insulated water pipe with his head. With a hiss of hydraulics, the entire section of wall retracted, revealing a narrow, dark passage that sloped steeply downwards. It was an escape tunnel, a bolt hole, one of many secrets this place still held. Jake followed the dog back to the main chamber, his mind reeling with the sheer genius of his friend's preparations. Leo hadn't just built a fortress. He had created a fully interactive weapon, and he had made his truest, most loyal companion the living key. He sat down on the edge of the bunk, the rifle resting across his lap. Kaiser came to him, resting his heavy head on Jake's knee. Jake looked down into those intelligent amber eyes and finally broke the silence. "He really thought of everything, didn't he, boy?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. He stroked the dog's broad head, his fingers tracing the old scars hidden in the thick fur. He knew they were coming for him, and he still walked right into it. The bravest man I ever knew. He thought of all the times they had relied on each other, the unspoken trust that had kept them alive in impossible situations. And he realized that Leo's final act had been the ultimate expression of that trust. He had trusted Jake to understand. He had trusted Kaiser to be his messenger. And he had trusted them, together, to finish the war he had started. "He left this fight to us, Kaiser," Jake whispered, leaning his head back against the cold wall. "It's just you and me now. We're all that's left of the team." In that moment, the bond between them solidified into something unbreakable. It was no longer a man and an animal. It was two soldiers in the same foxhole, bound by a shared loyalty to a fallen commander. It was a covenant, a solemn promise made to the ghost of Leo Vance to see his mission through to the end. A new alert sounded through the chamber, pulling Jake from his thoughts. Multiple ground signatures detected, 5 kilometers out and closing fast. Jake stood up, the rifle feeling light in his hands. He moved to the holographic map, Kaiser at his side. Several red icons were now moving steadily toward their position, a wolf pack closing in on its prey. They were coming. Jake looked down at Kaiser, who looked back up at him, a low growl rumbling in his chest. They were outnumbered. They were outgunned. They were trapped in a tomb miles from civilization. And for the first time in 7 years, Jake Thorne felt truly alive. He and his partner were ready. The holographic map was a silent, three-dimensional battlefield. The red icons representing Thorne's mercenaries moved with a chilling, predatory grace, spreading out from their insertion point to form a perfect, closing circle around the cliff face. They were not a disorganized mob. They were a pack of wolves, professional and disciplined, using textbook sweep and clear formations. Jake watched their methodical advance, a cold knot of respect tightening in his gut. These were not second-rate thugs. They were Tier 1 operators, the kind of men he had once fought alongside. Apex Solutions had sent its very best. He saw them pause, attempting to launch smaller tactical drones to get a view of the terrain from above, but the bunker's powerful signal jammer filled the air with a storm of white noise. On the map, their communication signals appeared as faint, frustrated flickers that died within inches of their source. They were deaf and blind, reduced to using hand signals to coordinate their search. It was a testament to Leo's foresight, a powerful first line of defense that had bought Jake precious time. But the map, while useful, only showed positions. Jake needed eyes on the ground. He needed to see his enemy, to study their equipment, their numbers, their demeanor. He scanned the main console, his fingers flying across the interface, searching for camera controls. He found the system, but it was locked, protected by another layer of Leo's infuriating, brilliant security protocols. He tried a few override codes, his frustration mounting. He could hear the enemy circling his tomb, but he couldn't see them. Kaiser, who had been sitting calmly at his side, seemed to sense the shift in Jake's mood. The dog stood, stretched his powerful frame, and walked over to the far wall of the command center. Set into the smooth metallic surface was a series of decorative stone slabs, each bearing the distinct impression of a fossil. One, at the very bottom, contained the beautiful swirling pattern of an ammonite. It was the kind of unique detail Leo would have appreciated. Kaiser sniffed at the ammonite fossil, then looked back at Jake. He lifted his right paw and pressed it firmly into the center of the fossil's spiral. The main monitor in front of Jake immediately flickered, the holographic map replaced by a grid of 16 high-definition video feeds. His breath caught in his throat. The images were crystal clear, broadcast from tiny, brilliantly concealed micro-cameras hidden in pine cones, behind flakes of bark, and within fissures in the rock. He had a complete 360-degree view of the entire perimeter. He could see them now. 8 of them, moving with the quiet, deadly efficiency of men who were masters of their trade. They were clad in black, state-of-the-art tactical gear, carrying suppressed carbines. They swept the area, their movements economical, their eyes constantly scanning for any sign of a disturbance in the snow, any hint of a hidden entrance. But they found nothing. Leo's camouflage was perfect. The fortress remained a ghost. As he watched, the calm, synthesized voice of the bunker's AI spoke again. Alert! Hostile energy surge detected. Counter-frequency electronic warfare active. Attempting to bypass jamming protocols. On a side monitor, a power grid schematic began to flash with red warnings. A massive brute force electronic attack was being directed at them, an attempt to overwhelm the jammer. The geothermal generator's output spiked dangerously. System overload. Imminent, a message flashed in bold red letters. The lights in the bunker flickered. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. He dove back into the console, searching for power management controls, a way to reroute energy from non-essential systems to boost the jammer's output. But everything was locked, automated. The system was designed to be self-regulating, and it was losing the battle. Just as a system-wide failure alarm began to blare, Kaiser acted again. He moved swiftly to a utility panel set low on the wall, a place Jake had assumed was a simple junction box. The dog used his nose to flip open the small cover, revealing a cluster of bundled wires and conduits. Hidden deep inside was a small, recessed lever, barely visible to the human eye. With a precise and deliberate motion, Kaiser pushed the lever sideways with the edge of his snout. Instantly, the blaring alarm cut off. The lights in the bunker steadied. On the power grid monitor, Jake watched in amazement as a new schematic appeared. A secondary auxiliary power system he hadn't even known existed came online, its energy flowing directly into the signal jammer, reinforcing it. The hostile energy surge was repelled, and the system stabilized, now stronger than before. Jake leaned back in his chair, a slow breath escaping his lips. He looked at the dog, who had returned to his side as if nothing had happened. He was truly in awe. Leo hadn't just trained Kaiser. He had integrated him into the very architecture of the fortress. The dog was a biomechanical key, a living, breathing interface for the bunker's most critical functions. He was a security measure that could not be hacked, a guardian who knew the secrets of the machine he was sworn to protect. Jake reached down and rested his hand on Kaiser's head, a silent gesture of profound respect. With the immediate crisis averted, they returned to observing the enemy. Jake watched the mercenaries regroup. Their leader, a tall man whose face was obscured by a helmet and goggles, received a report from one of his men, who pointed angrily at his own silent earpiece. Their frustration was palpable. They were standing directly on top of their prize, yet they were completely blind and deaf to it. They were hunting a ghost and were quickly realizing that they were the ones who were trapped in the dark. Jake felt a grim satisfaction. Leo had not just built a shield, he had forged a weapon that turned the enemy's technological superiority into a crippling weakness. The mercenaries' leader stood for a long moment, his posture radiating controlled fury. He then gave a series of sharp, decisive hand signals. The team stopped their fruitless search. They began to unsling heavy packs from their backs, pulling out equipment that was far more rudimentary and far more dangerous. Jake recognized the components immediately: seismic sensors, ground-penetrating radar units, and drilling equipment. Their high-tech search had failed. Now they were preparing to tear the mountain apart, piece by piece, to find what was hidden within. The invisible war of signals was over. The physical siege was about to begin. The atmosphere inside the command center was taut with a silent, mounting pressure. The war of signals had been won, but Jake knew it was only a preliminary victory. On the multi-panel display, he watched the 8 mercenaries work with a chilling, detached professionalism. They were no longer searching aimlessly. They had transitioned to a new, far more dangerous phase. Under the direction of their unseen leader, they established a meticulous grid pattern in the snow-covered forest in front of the cliff face. 2 men began to methodically sweep this grid with a device that looked like a high-tech pushcart. Jake recognized it instantly: ground-penetrating radar, GPR. They were no longer looking for a door. They were mapping the very earth, searching for any unnatural void, any hollow space that didn't belong. Simultaneously, other team members deployed a series of small, spiked sensors, driving them deep into the frozen ground. Seismic detectors. They were creating a detailed subterranean map, and with every passing minute, their digital picture of the world beneath their feet grew clearer. Jake watched a real-time representation of their scan on his own holographic map. He saw the GPR signal slowly painting a picture of the rock and soil. It was only a matter of time, an hour, maybe 2, before the massive, man-made anomaly of the bunker would appear on their screens as clearly as a tumor on an X-ray. The walls of the fortress, once a symbol of security, now felt like the closing jaws of a trap. He was being cornered, not by men, but by methodical, inescapable technology. To wait was to die. To remain on the defensive was to cede the battle. Leo had given him a fortress, but a fortress was useless without a soldier willing to fight outside its walls. The decision was not born of panic, but of cold, hard tactical reality. He had to counterattack. He had to disrupt their operation, to break their focus, to remind them that the ghost they were hunting had teeth. He moved with a fluid, renewed purpose. He shrugged on the insulated parka over his body armor. He slung the BCM rifle over his shoulder and secured a small pack containing a few of the remote activators for the non-lethal traps, a pair of binoculars, and spare magazines. He was stepping out of the command center and back onto the battlefield. He turned to Kaiser, who watched his preparations with an unwavering gaze. The dog whined, a low note of concern and understanding. Jake knelt, looking the old dog square in the eye. "I'll be back," he said, his voice low and firm. "You have the watch. Guard this place, boy. You guard our 6. It was a command, not a request. Kaiser responded not with a bark, but with a quiet, resolute stillness. He sat, his posture alert, his eyes fixed on the monitors. He understood his duty. He was the keeper of the fortress. Jake gave him one last firm pat on the head, and then turned, disappearing into the narrow, hidden passage that led down into the mountain's dark heart. The air in the tunnel was frigid and smelled of damp stone and ancient earth. It was a tight squeeze with the pack on, forcing him to move sideways, one hand on the cold, rough-hewn wall. The passage sloped downwards for what felt like 100 yards before opening up onto a small, slick ledge. Below him was a scene from a forgotten world. A subterranean stream, its water as black and shiny as obsidian, flowed silently through a natural cavern. The only sound was the gentle, rhythmic drip of water from stalactites high above. This was the genius of Leo's design. No GPR or seismic sensor could effectively map what lay beneath a moving body of water. It was the perfect flaw in their technological net. There was no time to hesitate. Holding the rifle high, Jake took a deep breath and stepped off the ledge. The shock of the icy water was a physical blow. It stole his breath and sent 1,000 needles of cold into his skin. For a moment, his muscles seized, but his training and adrenaline took over. He kicked off the bottom, submerging himself completely in the crushing, silent blackness. He swam with the current, his eyes open but seeing nothing, navigating by feel and memory of the schematics. The passage was short, perhaps only 30 feet, but in the breathless, freezing dark, it felt like an eternity. Just as his lungs began to burn with a desperate fire, his outstretched hand brushed against the rough surface of a rock wall. He felt for a handhold and pulled himself upwards, his head breaking the surface with a loud, gasping breath. He had emerged in a small, hidden grotto, a collapsed ice cave tucked behind a frozen waterfall, a good 200 yards away from the main cliff face and well outside the mercenaries' search grid. He was soaked, freezing, and utterly alive. He was a ghost, risen from the mountain's belly. He hauled himself out of the water, his body shaking uncontrollably from the cold. He moved quickly, forcing his numb muscles to work, knowing that to stay still was to die of hypothermia. He found a sheltered spot among a dense cluster of firs, a high point that gave him a clear vantage point of the enemy's position. He stripped the wet parka, his body armor having kept his core mostly dry, and let the biting wind begin its work of freezing the outer layers of his clothing. Through his binoculars, the scene below was chillingly clear. He could see the mercenaries, their movements unhurried and confident. They were completely oblivious, utterly focused on their technological hunt. They believed their target was a rat in a cage, waiting passively for them to drill down from the ceiling. They had no idea the rat had slipped out the back and was now watching them from the shadows, a wolf in the trees. Jake's eyes scanned the scene, not as a man in hiding, but as a predator studying his prey. His gaze swept past the soldiers and locked onto their equipment. He saw the GPR unit, the seismic sensors, and tucked away near their command post, a small portable generator humming away, its exhaust a faint plume in the cold air. It was the heart of their operation, the power source for the very technology that was threatening to unearth him. That was his target. He settled into position, the snow a cold cushion beneath him. He deployed the rifle's bipod, pushing it firmly into the snowpack to create a stable firing platform. He checked the wind, a gentle drift, from left to right. He adjusted his aim, his breathing slowing until it was a barely visible cloud in the frigid air. The world narrowed to the view through his scope. The crosshairs settled on the humming generator. He was no longer running. He was no longer hiding. The race against time had just become a hunt, and he was about to announce his presence on his own terms. The world through the rifle scope was a cold, clinical place. Jake's breathing was a soft, steady rhythm, his heartbeat a slow, deliberate drum. He was no longer a man. He was an instrument of purpose, an extension of the cold steel he held in his hands. The crosshairs were steady on the humming generator, the heart of the enemy's operation. He exhaled, and in the space between heartbeats, he squeezed the trigger. The BCM rifle bucked gently against his shoulder, the suppressor reducing the sound of the shot to a dull, heavy cough that was swallowed by the vast, snowy forest. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then, a small, dark hole appeared on the generator's casing. A shower of sparks erupted, and with a pathetic whining groan, the machine died. Down below, the lights on the mercenaries' advanced equipment flickered and went dark. The screen of the GPR unit went black. The low hum of their technology was replaced by the natural, unnerving silence of the wilderness. For a moment, the 8 men stood in confused stillness. Then their training kicked in. They fanned out, taking cover behind trees, their rifles raised, scanning the silent woods. But they were looking for a muzzle flash, listening for a thunderous report. They were hunting a conventional soldier. Jake was something else entirely. He was already gone. Before the echo of his shot had faded, he had retracted the rifle's bipod and melted back into the trees, his movements swift and silent. He used his intimate knowledge of the forest, the game trails and hidden hollows he had explored during his 7 years of exile to circle their position. He moved like a ghost, his boots barely disturbing the snow. From a new vantage point on the opposite side of their perimeter, he took aim again. This time, his target was the delicate sensor array of the GPR unit itself. Another suppressed shot, another precise impact. The high-tech lens shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. Their eyes were now permanently blind. Chaos began to ripple through their ranks. The leader was shouting commands, but with their comms jammed and their equipment dead, his voice was swallowed by the trees. They were disconnected, isolated. Jake began to use suppressive fire, not to kill, but to herd them. He fired rounds into the thick branches above their heads, sending showers of bark and snow raining down. He sent a round into a snowbank just to their left, then another into a tree trunk to their right. The suppressed shots were phantoms. The sound was everywhere and nowhere at once. The mercenaries, unable to locate a single point of origin, became pinned down, their confidence eroding with every invisible shot. They were a pack of wolves, but they were being hunted by a whisper. Jake pulled one of the small remote activators from his pack. He had studied the map of Leo's traps for hours, memorizing their locations. He pressed a button. 100 yards from his position, near a cluster of 3 mercenaries, a buried concussive charge detonated with a deep, earth-shaking thump. It wasn't lethal, but the blast of pure sound and pressure sent the 3 men sprawling, their ears ringing, their senses scrambled. The psychological toll was immense. Their advanced technology was useless. They were being systematically dismantled by an unseen force. The forest itself had become their enemy. Their discipline began to fray, replaced by a primal, creeping fear. This was the moment Jake had been waiting for. After sowing chaos, he created an illusion of order. He deliberately fired a few shots from a single position, then made a show of retreating back towards a narrow rocky canyon. He made his tracks obvious. His withdrawal looked like the desperate flight of a man on the run. From his concealed position, the mercenary leader saw it. He saw the tracks, the clear path of retreat. Arrogant and furious at being made to look like an amateur, he saw it as an opportunity to finally corner his prey. "He's running," he yelled to the men closest to him. "Omega 1, 2, with me. The rest of you, hold this perimeter." He had taken the bait. Elias Thorne, accompanied by his 2 best operators, charged after the ghost, right into the jaws of the trap. The canyon was a natural choke point, its high granite walls providing no cover and only one way forward. Jake was waiting, perched high above on a narrow, hidden ledge. As Thorne and his 2 men entered the canyon, Jake raised his rifle one last time. His target was not a man, but the weapon in Thorne's hands. Another soft cough from the suppressor. The bullet crossed the canyon in an instant and struck Thorne's rifle with a violent crack of metal on metal. The weapon was torn from his grasp, its receiver shattered and useless. Before his 2 men could even react, Jake revealed himself, stepping to the edge of the ledge. "That's far enough," he called down, his voice a low, gravelly rasp, unused to speaking. It was the voice of a man who had been silent for too long. Thorne stared up, his face now visible without his helmet, a mask of pure shock and fury. "Thorne," Jake said, the name an accusation. "You came a long way for what was his. You're not leaving with it." "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Thorne snarled, his corporate polish stripped away to reveal the predator beneath. "I know exactly who you are," Jake replied, his voice flat and cold. "You're the man who murdered Leo Vance." With a roar of fury, Thorne lunged, not at Jake, but at the rock-face, beginning to climb with a surprising, desperate agility. His men raised their rifles, but before they could fire, a deep, menacing growl echoed through the canyon. From a dark crevice near the canyon floor, the exit of another of the bunker's secret tunnels, a gray and white blur erupted. Kaiser. The dog moved with the speed and precision of a guided missile. He did not go for the two soldiers. His target was the leader. He launched himself through the air, hitting Thorne in the center of his chest with the force of a battering ram. The two of them crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Thorne, dazed, reached for a combat knife strapped to his vest. But Kaiser was faster. The dog's powerful jaws clamped down on Thorne's right arm, the pressure immense. There was no savage tearing, only a controlled, immobilizing force. Thorne cried out in pain and rage, his fingers uncurling as the knife clattered onto the rocks. Kaiser held him there, a low, rumbling growl his only sound, his eyes fixed on the threat. He was the perfect guardian, the final living piece of Leo's plan, executing his last command: protect the successor. The two other mercenaries stood frozen, their rifles half raised, unsure whether to shoot the man on the ledge or the dog on their commander. It was over. Jake slid down from the ledge, his rifle held at a low ready. He stood over his defeated enemy, the man who had haunted his every waking moment for 7 years. The air was still and cold, the only sounds the ragged breathing of the men and the low, steady growl from the loyal dog at his feet. He was the inheritor. And with his guardian beside him, he had just claimed his legacy. The canyon was silent in the aftermath of the battle. The remaining 5 mercenaries, hearing the confrontation and seeing their leader fall, had surrendered without another shot fired. They were soldiers, not fanatics, and they knew when a fight was lost. Jake, moving with a detached efficiency, disarmed them and secured them using their own zip ties, leaving them for the authorities that would inevitably be called to this remote corner of the mountains. His fight with them was over. He returned to the bunker with Kaiser, the weight of victory feeling heavier than he had imagined. The fight was won, but the war was not. Justice for Leo was not yet complete. He knew there had to be one final step, one last directive from his friend. He sat at the console and found a single final encrypted file in the main directory, a file that had only become visible after the Valhalla container was opened. It was named Protocol. The password prompt was simple: "Who's a good boy?" Jake looked down at the loyal dog sitting at his feet and typed in the only possible answer: Kaiser. The file opened. It was Leo's final letter. It was brief and to the point. The first part was the contact information for a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Leo's notes described her as a relentless investigative journalist who had a reputation for taking on powerful corporations and corrupt government agencies. She was fearless, trusted no one, and most importantly, could not be bought. A secure encrypted messaging channel was provided. The second part was a string of codes and keys for a cryptocurrency wallet. A simple note followed: "For your fresh start, brother, don't argue. You've earned it." It was a final gift, a final act of a friendship that had transcended even death. Using the bunker's secure satellite array for the last time, Jake sent a single anonymous message to Sarah Jenkins. "I have irrefutable proof of treason by Apex Solutions, including illegal arms sales and the targeted killing of U.S. military personnel. I also have their chief of security, Elias Thorne, and his strike team in custody. The enclosed data chip contains the full unredacted evidence. Do what you do best." He attached the coordinates to a dead-drop location deep in the forest, miles away, and hit send. Then he severed the connection for good. He spent the next few days in the quiet hum of the fortress, watching the world from the safety of his underground haven. He watched as local law enforcement, guided by an anonymous tip, found and arrested Thorne and his stunned, frostbitten team. Then, a week later, the storm broke. It started as a single explosive article by Sarah Jenkins, published online. Within hours, it was the biggest news story in the world. The headlines were a torrent of outrage and disbelief. Apex betrayal, defense, giant accused of treason, Pentagon rocked by murder-for-profit scandal. The hero who died to expose it all. The story of Leo Vance. Jake watched news feeds showing federal agents raiding the gleaming Virginia headquarters of Apex Solutions. He saw the CEO, a man he had only seen in audio logs, being led away in handcuffs. The entire company, the entire web of lies and greed, came crashing down in a spectacular firestorm of justice. Leo's name was cleared, his sacrifice given meaning. He was no longer a casualty. He was a hero. The mission was over. Now it was time to disappear. Following the final instructions in Leo's protocol, Jake walked to the utility room. He found the panel for the scuttling sequence. It wasn't a violent self-destruct, but a systematic shutdown designed to entomb the facility forever. He initiated it. A calm, synthesized voice announced, "Scuttling sequence activated. Full system collapse in 60 minutes." He returned to the command center and began the final data wipe, erasing the servers, destroying every last trace of the evidence and of his own digital ghost. The green and amber lights of the server rack blinked out one by one until the humming heart of the fortress fell silent. With Kaiser at his side, he took one last walk through the facility. He passed the empty bunk, the quiet armory, the dark command center. This place had been his crucible, the place where he had been broken down and reforged. It had been Leo's final gift, his shield and his sword. It had served its purpose. He gathered his meager belongings into his old pack. He clipped a simple leather leash onto Kaiser's paracord collar. Together, they walked down the corridor for the last time. The massive steel door slid open, revealing a world washed clean, the bright sun glittering on the fresh snow. They stepped out into the crisp, cold air. Behind them, the door hissed shut one last time. A deep, grinding rumble echoed from within the heart of the mountain, the sound of supports retracting, of systems failing, of a fortress surrendering its secrets to the stone. A small, controlled rock slide, engineered by Leo, cascaded down the cliff face, burying the entrance under tons of granite. In minutes, it was as if it had never been there. The mountain kept its secrets once more. The sun was just beginning to crest the distant horizon, painting the underside of the clouds in strokes of fiery orange and soft pink. A battered old pickup truck, one Leo had left waiting for him in a storage unit in town, rumbled down a nameless two-lane highway, heading east. Jake drove, his hands resting easily on the steering wheel. The windows were down, and the cool morning air whipped through the cab, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. In the passenger seat, Kaiser sat proudly, his head out the window, his ears flapping in the wind, a look of pure, simple joy on his face. The fury that had fueled Jake for the past few weeks was gone. The grief that had been his shadow for 7 years had lifted. He felt quiet, empty, but not in a bad way. It was a clean, peaceful emptiness, a blank slate waiting for a new story to be written. He wasn't thinking about the money in the crypto wallet or the men now rotting in federal prison. He wasn't thinking about what came next or where this road would lead. For the first time, he was simply present, feeling the rumble of the engine, watching the light of a new dawn spread across the land. He looked over at Kaiser. The old dog pulled his head back inside and looked at him, his amber eyes soft and steady. In those eyes, Jake saw the unwavering loyalty that had crossed a wilderness to find him, the fierce courage that had faced down a killer, and the quiet companionship that had anchored him through the storm. And then, for the first time since before that terrible day in 2018, A real, unburdened smile touched Jacob Thorne's lips. It was a small, quiet thing, a gentle curve of the mouth, but it was as bright and as hopeful as the rising sun. He was free. The road ahead was unknown, the destination unwritten, but it was their road to travel, together, a long journey back to the quiet, peaceful life that had been stolen from them, one sunrise at a time. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest light in our darkest moments comes from a loyalty that never wavers, and a love that never truly leaves us. A promise kept by a faithful friend can be the one thing that guides us back to the dawn. The bond between a veteran and their canine companion is a truly special one, and it is our honor to share these tales with you. If these stories of courage and healing touch your heart, we invite you to join our community by subscribing. Your likes, shares, and comments help these stories of loyalty find the audience they deserve. The journey doesn't have to end here, as another adventure is waiting for you right now on the screen.